welcome in. How are we doing tonight, fellas?
Doing well, Matthew.
Yeah, I'm doing good. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for coming. I know you guys just did a college draft recap with the Marcast, so I appreciate your follow-up with me. Have a good little conversation today, catch up on some UFL news, and then hear your thoughts on a few subjects as well.
Sounds good.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yes, sir. So we got Greg Parks, Anthony Miller. Everybody knows you guys in the spring football game. Really no introduction needed. You've been on the show numerous times. Trusted sources for UFL news and updates. So just want to give you a quick intro. It's good to be back. I haven't done an episode of the UFL Insiders in a while. So thanks for coming on, guys. Breaking the waters a little bit with me. Let me swim before I drown.
Well, we got news finally, so at least we got stuff to talk about. So that's
Yes, sir. Let's jump off into it. I mean, let's just go ahead and talk about the UFL, the NFL signings. I mean, when I did this yesterday, I counted 19. I'm sure there's been more added today, and we have some that are unofficially announced as well. Do you guys have an updated number on that? I believe it's like 22.
Officially it's 20, I think, because
Okay.
Ty Scott signed with Seattle today. I know they announced that. I know there's I think a couple others that may be unofficial.
Yeah, that's the toughest part, because sometimes we're hearing about the ones unofficially, days prior to the actual signing.
Yeah, because today was Ty Scott and Sal Cannella, I think, were today's confirmed ones.
Yeah, I know the Marcus Sims signing was. I was actually a little worried because it was announced and then nothing happened, and finally on the eve of camp, he signed. So that's usually how it is. There's a pretty big dead period for NFL transactions. So even if things are in the works, they don't become official until everybody gathers for training camp, which is what happened there.
Yes, sir. So in terms of the guys that are making it, most of these are pretty impactful in my opinion. Do you guys feel like we will see some of them return or stick with the NFL spots they're given or given the opportunity for?
I mean, I don't know how many are actually going to land on NFL rosters. We don't typically see. I don't even think we see 50% of them last year even make NFL rosters. So, I mean, I think if we can see even just 5 or 6 of these guys make an NFL roster, I think that would be massive for the league. But I know typically it's not a very high percentage of them actually getting into the NFL. So, I mean, I know we were talking about this before we went on, but we'd like to see, hopefully some wide receivers, some skilled guys that can get in there. And because I know special teams is usually the number one way people can get into the league, but maybe now with the new kickoff rule and maybe some of these guys that have that experience on the XFL kickoff, maybe that's a good opportunity for them to get in there and maybe earn a roster spot because they already been through that kickoff rule and they know what it takes to, make the tackles or return. So that might actually be an advantage for maybe some of these former XFL players.
I remember being really excited last year when so many former XFL players got signed into NFL training camps. And then by the end, there was only one that made that initial 53-man roster, which was punter Dan Whelan with the Green Bay Packers. Now, throughout the year, players would get put on the roster and would play in NFL games. Certainly, a lot of them made practice squads after being cut from training camp. But I think it was disheartening not only for fans, but also for the league to see only one player make that 53-man roster out of training camp. So, I mean, you're talking right now, we've got, I think, 21 players signed. Again, one or two, the expectations are not very high here for this, but I think you'll see a handful make practice squads and have the opportunity through that to eventually get on the roster if injuries happen, make game day elevations and play on Sundays. So all is not lost, even if we don't land a lot of guys on those NFL rosters after training camp.
Yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say the same thing. Last year, we were very excited to see some of this progress. And then as it went forward, we didn't see most of our guys make it. It does feel kind of weird because with the merger, I felt like it kind of messed with it a little bit as well. Same thing with the draft. Yeah, I hope some of these guys make it. There's a couple guys that went to the Saints. There's a bunch of stuff that I'm liking right now. So hopefully they keep it up and we can see some of our spring football talent spread into the NFL atmosphere. Now, I mean, once this is over, some of these guys could sign with the CFL, correct? I mean, they still have that option after their training camp.
Yeah, I mean, they're terminated from their UFL contract. So, I mean, the UFL team may own their rights still, but I mean, if they're off an NFL roster, I mean, technically they're free agents, so they can sign with whoever they want to. I mean, Darnell Sankey, was kind of a good example of somebody who, got out of his XFL contract and was able to go back to the CFL and play there after the season. So, yeah, as long as they're termed from their contract, I believe they can sign with whoever they want to.
Gotcha. So the actual team that let them go, do they still have any rights? Do you guys know? I tried to research some of this, and it's choppy because you're going from USFL to XFL still on some of these rules. So, I mean, if say Saul Canella, he gets cut, he wants to come back. Is that the Renegades guy still, or is he jumping back into that draft?
Yeah, it does mention at the end of every press release that XFL comms or UFL comms put out. I haven't done that in a while. I haven't called it XFL accidentally in a while. So that's one quarter in the jar. No, whenever the league puts out a press release saying, so-and-so signed into the NFL, it always notes at the bottom that, his UFL team retains his rights should he return to the UFL. So, Sal Cannella, if he doesn't make the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, wants to come back to the UFL for the 2025 season, he would be, his rights would go back to the Arlington Renegades.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that's a little more comfortable. Knowing that makes things a lot better. And I'm going to show that real quick as well on screen, so people can see, because some of these questions I'm asking are questions I'm seeing online. So right here, the DC Defenders will retain Scott's rights should he return to the UFL. So you're totally correct in that. All right. So, I mean, we got a lot of athletes going. Is there anybody that you guys really expect to make it to the next level looking at things?
I mean, the special teams always seem to do well. So Jake Bates would have a pretty good shot at it. I mean, I hate to knock on Jake Bates, but I feel like there was more accurate kickers in the UFL than him. But he's a very flashy guy just because he's got a huge leg, and I think that's become a big part of the game. So, for him, he was a kickoff specialist when he was at Arkansas. I mean, he was all SEC when he was there. So, I mean, if he wants to earn a roster spot, if he can be accurate with his kicks and he's able to, contribute on the kickoff as well, I think that's a big way for him to make a roster. So I think that would probably be the easiest person to point to for someone to make a final NFL roster.
Gotcha.
6 for 6 on field goals today in Detroit Lions training camp. So he's off to a good start. I like Ty Scott with Seattle. I haven't done a deep dive on Seattle's roster yet as far as what Ty Scott's chances are of making the team, but I think he's one of those young guys who didn't get a real big opportunity last year. I mean, he was drafted in the XFL rookie draft last year. So at that point, whatever it was, June, he was not on an NFL roster because remember, last year's rules were different than this year's UFL College Draft rules. Last year in the XFL draft, you could not be under contract with an NFL team in order to be drafted. So he was not even on a team heading into training camp. And now he comes to the UFL, does really well with the DC Defenders, gets an opportunity, uses it as a springboard back into the NFL with the Seahawks. So, we're going to talk about the college draft a little later on, but if you want a poster child for what you want the college draft to do for guys, Ty Scott is the one, because not a lot of rookie draft players ended up playing in the UFL this year. Ty Scott was one of them, and it paid off for him. He made it work, and he's now in the NFL.
Yes, sir. That's a Disney movie right there. You'll love to see it. Seriously. When I saw that come through today, it made me extremely happy.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at Tyler Lockett. I mean, he's getting up there in age, and that's a receiving core that they've been really trying to focus on getting younger with. And DK Metcalf is always on the trade block for some reason. I mean, he's always been in talks for being traded off that team. So, I mean, if they want to go younger, I mean, Ty Scott has a good opportunity to maybe sneak in there. He probably won't be a top 3 receiver, but if he gets in maybe that 5th or 6th slot and maybe contributes on special teams, that may actually be a pretty good spot for him.
That's the hope.
That's the thing too. Sorry to interrupt,
Go
Matthew,
ahead.
but with the roster sizes and the game day rosters the way they were for the UFL this year, they were very small. So you had a lot of key contributors on offense and defense also playing special teams. That's going to be the ticket for some of these 5th and 6th receivers to be making NFL teams. And you got, some younger guys, some older veterans who the likes of Ty Scott will be competing with, who maybe don't have the special teams experience that some of these guys coming from the UFL will have.
That's going to be big for that special teams change up, I feel. Having someone there prepared, ready to go. It could be coached up. It doesn't have to be completely broken down and brought back up. I've been looking at Kevin Austin Jr. With the Saints. I think that he's got the potential to play some special teams in that area. No, we're not looking at a star receiver, but we should see some flashes of what we saw in Birmingham, which he didn't do too much in Birmingham either, but he looked good. And that's really what matters in that training camp atmosphere. Last year, I went and followed John Trey Kirkland when he was with the Saints at training camp. And it was interesting to say the least. I saw more of him not practicing off the field than I did on the field, just due to the way things were set up. He eventually, as you know, came back to the UFL this year, but that special teams was a little different when we were looking at it last year. It was the normal setup. This year, I think that's really going to excel some of these guys, show what they got.
Yeah, I mean, if you can get some, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we see more former XFL defenders maybe get some opportunities to try out for NFL teams, just because, again, I mean, they have the experience on those kickoffs that the XFL had in 2023. So if you get guys like that who have experience with it, I think that's a major advantage for them to make a roster.
Agreed. I got a comment from DeMarcus. He said, "I think eventually we get you to the NFL route is going to have to take a back seat to a degree. Having a handful of guys make it doesn't seem to be a long-term identity. Makes it so it doesn't seem to be a long-term identity." There we go. Got it out. What do you guys think of that?
I think there's some truth to that. I think right now the league doesn't really have that much of an identity. And so you want to legitimize these players in the eyes of fans or would-be fans. How do you do that? You hold up, as a great example, these players who've come through your league and gone on and done things in the NFL. And so from an identity point of view, you would like the league to kind of be able to stand on its own and get people to want to watch it, regardless of whether these players are coming through and going to the NFL. In terms of, that's from the fan point of view. In terms of the player point of view, it's always going to be seen as a springboard to the NFL, because the UFL is never going to trump the NFL in terms of popularity, in terms of visibility, in terms of prestige. It's always going to be players. Their goal is always going to be to get to the NFL. And if they think that they can do so using the UFL as a means to do it, they're going to do it. So I think you still have to appeal to players and agents as, hey, look, this isn't the NFL. Maybe one day they can make a good living in the UFL, but the money is never going to be the same. The fame and the prestige is never going to be the same. But maybe there are guys like an AJ McCarron who says, hey, if I get to the NFL, great, but I'm in this for different reasons. But those guys are few and far between right now. Maybe eventually you get there, but it's going to take a while to build that brand up.
Yeah, you're right on the dot there. I mean, I would say, I feel like UFL officials, if you ask anyone in the front office, they don't want to be known as the NFL farm system. I mean, they want to stand on their own. They don't want to be a developmental league. They want to be its own league. They want to be the NFL for spring. I mean, that's how they want to be viewed as. Unfortunately, if you want to attract players right now, yeah, like Greg said, I mean, you kind of have to pitch it as, hey, you can come in here, get some game tape for yourself, and then try to get back in the NFL or get into the NFL. I mean, that's what the UFL is. That's what the UFL is supposed to be designed to do. It's just like, the indoor football league's designed to, hey, it may get you into the UFL so you can take that next step. I know the league doesn't want to be viewed like that, and I think they should. I've always gone back and forth about how they should be. Like, should they be a developmental league? Should they not be? Like, I think right now you kind of they're in that stage at the beginning stages where you have to be like, okay, we're a developmental league. But if you can get to the point where the ratings are getting higher, you start adding more teams, then you can get to the point where maybe 2 to 5 years down the road is like, no, we're not a developmental league. We are controlling spring, for sports in the spring. So that's what I think where they need to get to. But right now, they have to be viewed as a developmental league, at least for the time being.
Yeah, you guys both make great points, and I'm in agreement about it being a developmental. I was similar in thought process a couple of years ago, even some last year. But after taking the step back and actually looking at the product, you realize that this is what the UFL offers these athletes. I mean, we get to see great football, but the UFL is offering them a paycheck and the chance to earn some playing time and get film, and that's what it's priority number one. And the second thing, I guess, should be selling tickets and getting fan engagement. But without the athletes, we have no sport. And you guys can both speak on this as well. Like this year, I enjoyed watching a lot of these games where last year XFL got kind of dry there mid-season, post-season. It wasn't very enjoyable, but you could tell the difference this year. I mean, even if the guys go to the CFL, most of these guys are making more in the UFL, from my understanding, just due to taxes as well from being out of country or whatever. I know that, like, talking to some of the guys, they're like making $48,000 a year being in Canada playing. So you're making more here just in the few months you're playing for the UFL as well.
Yeah. And currency is different in Canada as well, so I'm sure that has an effect on it. But at the end of the day, I mean, the UFL kind of has to stick with that developmental thought for now, and then hopefully get to the point where they can, stand on its own and be able to compete with the likes of like the NBA and Major League Baseball and ratings and be able to control spring. But they're not quite there yet. But could they get there? Yeah, there's definitely a possibility they could get there, but it's going to be a slow burn to get there.
Yeah, agreed. It's going to be tough, but the structure now is decently showing that, like, everyone's paid the same. They're not making anybody a glorified star. That's one thing I like about it as well. You can't say, hey, well, this guy's making more than me. No, you are all making the same money as long as you're active. To me, it feels like as fans, we get really disappointed when we see these athletes go on and do better or not return. But I mean, that's something we have to expect being a fan of this league. It's going to happen watching spring football. You guys know that as well as me.
Yeah, I think that's right now. It's something to celebrate. I mean, we want to see guys get opportunities in the NFL because it legitimizes the UFL. When you hear announcers talk on games, Sal Cannella makes the catch down the middle, played for the Arlington Renegades in the UFL. I mean, there's still a lot of people, a lot of football fans who don't know about the UFL. So if they're constantly being told, hey, these players are coming from the UFL, they might decide to seek it out at some point. And it helps legitimize the league. It helps legitimize the players in the eyes of prospective fans. And I think the UFL is in a position right now where they need all the eyeballs on the product they can get. So if they can have guys go into the NFL, be successful, and part of their story be they came from the UFL, that's good for the UFL right now.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, I mean, how many times have we heard the Brandon Aubrey story where he went from being a soccer player to first time, really playing legitimate football was in the USFL, and he became an all-pro, just like Kevontae Turpin. Like, he was playing internationally and then came to the USFL, and then they both became all-pros. So like Greg said, you want to have stories like that. You need to have players that can be successful because it's going to it will attract other players to be like, well, I played well in the NFL, but I want to get back in it. Let me go to the UFL first and, prove that I can still play and then get re-signed back into the league.
All good points, guys. And I can see all the perspective, whether it's media, fan, player. It's interesting, but let's move on. I accidentally skipped our first subject. I got too excited talking about signings. So let's roll back. The Houston Roughnecks named Will Lewis general manager. So our previous general was it Lionel Vattel? Is that correct? That was the previous GM. He's retired now. Will Lewis took over. A lot of changes in Houston real fast once that memo came out, and I'm going to pull it up. Greg, you wrote an article about this. I believe it came out today. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah. I'm surprised at the speed in which Houston has turned over its roster. I counted about 1/3 of their players from 2024 were waived on Tuesday, and we're seeing reporting of more. I don't want to call them signings because that's not technically true. So these players are agreeing to terms with the UFL and the Houston Roughnecks. So more changes on the way for Houston. A lot of things we don't know. We don't know what the offseason roster, how many players can a team hold on its offseason roster? How many players are they going to be able to take to training camp next year? Because I know there was some talk that that number may be lower than it was last year with the merger and all the dispersal drafts. So we have to keep in mind all of that stuff. But I mean, kind of the point I made in my article, when you're 1-9 and you're last in the league, you need to make changes. Like that's not acceptable for a franchise if you're a head coach, if you're a player, if you're a GM. So certainly probably not acceptable for UFL management. So on one hand, not a surprise that they are making drastic changes. I think what was surprising was the speed and the swiftness with which they cleaned house. Guys like Mark Thompson, who I believe was formerly all USFL at one point, led the league in rushing touchdowns. Braden Bowman, who was, they released 3 of their 4 tight ends. They released Donald Rutledge Jr., a safety who started all 10 games for them. So this wasn't just back of the roster guys. These were guys who, played meaningful snaps for Houston this year. And so, I'm not sure some of these changes, can they be attributed to potential changes in scheme? Does that mean changes in coordinators? It sounds like Curtis Johnson is sticking around. They're having a meet and greet, I think, in Houston with him soon. So that certainly sounds like he's planning on returning for 2025, but are his coordinators. So those are questions that we don't really have the answers to, but Houston's roster is definitely going to look a lot different next year.
I'm all for it. Do it to it, Will. Take charge, man. If you guys at home are watching, Will was the San Antonio Brahmas director of player personnel in 2023. So he is familiar somewhat with the spring leagues. I know looking back at that Brahma roster, I wasn't too big of a fan of it, though, honestly. But he has some experience, and the fact that they're taking some steps towards changes is promising, being someone that cares about the Houston Roughnecks.
Yeah, major kudos to Will Lewis for going in there and getting right to work and changing that roster. It absolutely needed to be overturned. I mean, when you watch that team last year, they were easily the worst team in this league, and it was just miserable to watch. And I think they needed to make the necessary changes there. You got guys like Mark Thompson, who these were guys that were good, but he underachieves this year. I mean, there's a lot of players on that list where you might be surprised as their starters, but they underachieve. I mean, they didn't get the job done. They needed to, like Donald Rutledge, like he has experience on that defense, but too many times that secondary got absolutely burned, and they just allowed big plays and they allowed a lot of points. Like you can't have stuff like that for guys who should be playing better than how they were. So I was actually quite surprised they didn't make any changes at quarterback.
Me as well.
It looks like right now they're keeping all the quarterbacks. So I'd be kind of interested to see how that's going to work. But all those players on there, I mean, it sucks because you don't want players to lose jobs or anything like that. But again, like when Greg said, you underachieve, you're not going to keep your job for very long. So the changes need to be made. Yeah, and I'll just say, I mean, hopefully maybe they'll do some changes to the coaching staff because they absolutely need that as well. They need a full reboot of that franchise from scratch, and Will Lewis needs to go in there and just clean house. Like I don't, I'm still iffy on like if CJ Johnson should be let go or not, because he was actually good 2 years ago in 2023. Like that Houston team, he inherited a mess of a team also from Kevin Summerlin, and they went 5-5, and they actually looked pretty good. If it wasn't for Kenji Barhar getting injured in that Philadelphia Stars game that they played in the season, they might have been a playoff team. Like that was actually a pretty good football team that found ways to win games. It just, they fell apart at the end. So I think there's some potential there, but they have to clean house and just bring in all new guys. So hopefully the changes will be good for Houston. They'll be more competitive because that's a city that really deserves to have a better team and hopefully get more fans into the stadium.
I just want to add the caveat to the players that were signed. I think there were 16 of them on Tuesday to go along with the 16 releases. Those players are probably not going to be your frontline starters for the Roughnecks. So you're seeing a lot of these names, but these are guys who are not under contract with any pro league right now. We know from experience in spring leagues that a lot of the top players are going to come from those that are cut at the end of NFL training camps, don't get signed to practice squads, don't get signed to futures contracts at the end of next year. So they're kind of stockpiling depth right now, but I didn't see a lot of names on that list. And I did a little bit of research on him for my column that Matthew, you mentioned came out today. Not a lot of guys in there who are probably going to be starters. And if they are, that's problematic for Houston again this year. But, I think if you're Houston, you want to more than anything create competition in training camp. And these guys will come in. A couple of them are former San Antonio Brahmas from 2023 who Will Lewis knows. So you want to create competition up and down the roster. And I think at the very least, these guys will do that.
Yes, sir. I'm going to read your first sentence here. When you finish 1-9, last in the league, and hire a new general manager, plenty of roster changes can be expected.
Well said. Well said. Couldn't say it better myself.
You don't have to butter it up to make it
succinct.
I'll tell you, man, this Houston team was tough for me because the times we saw the heart they had last year, they would lose these games by a touchdown at the end. Or they would make a mistake and lose by, the time counting down off the play clock. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff I watched from this Houston team that made me upset as a football fan, as well as like someone that's in it. So hopefully that can get addressed because that was kind of sickening to me at points. At certain times, I felt like I was watching middle school football, if that makes sense. They'd lose their heart and then they'd lose the game.
Well, that's why, like, sometimes, you can point the finger at the players as much as possible, but at some point, when you make undisciplined mistakes, that's coaching. I
agree with you.
That's why, like, I know everyone's calling for CJ Johnson's head, and
I say give him another year.
I mean, you probably, I mean, and this is where you run into, how many of these coaches in the UFL are actually going to come back. So you may be limited on bringing back who you can. So maybe CJ Johnson does deserve a second chance and be able to put this team together. But he's going to be on a short leash. I mean, it's going to be like, dude, you got to get it done, or we're going to bring in somebody who's going to coach this team better, because right now it's very iffy on how he's performed as the head coach. He had a good first year, but then this last year was really rough. So hopefully he can, if he does get brought back, hopefully he gets the job done.
Agreed. Like you said, though, we didn't see any quarterback changes, which was kind of surprising to me.
There's still time.
I know, but just grabbing those names while you can may be impactful. You never know, even if it's just a trade tool down the line. That's my thought on it. Mm-hmm. What did I see? Garantano had some tryouts, or he met up with some staff with the New York Jets. Is that correct? I believe I saw that online. I don't see him going to the New York Jets, so he'll be. He
did try out with one team. I can't remember who it was. I know the New York Jets signed Ben Bryant, rookie undrafted free agent today, so they filled whatever quarterback spot they were looking for. But Jarrett Garantano, I'm not ready to turn the page on him yet as Houston's quarterback. He had a couple injury issues that I think prevented him from showing his potential, and there were some issues around him without Mark Thompson early in the season. The running game couldn't get on track. They had offensive line issues. And so, I'm not ready to cast him aside yet. I think there's something still to work with there. I'd at least bring him back if he's amenable to it, to compete for a job in 2025, potentially even the starter. But for sure, the quarterback room, like every room on that roster, should be improved for 2025 with additions.
Yeah, I mean, Reed Sinnott, actually, it may be the better, the more polished quarterback than Garantano, but Garantano's got the build to be a starting quarterback. Like he's your prototypical tall quarterback, strong arm. Like he's the type of quarterback you want to develop. So I think he's got a higher ceiling than like someone like Reed Sinnett. So he's someone that you can definitely develop and be a perfect example of a spring football quarterback.
Agreed.
So it was the Giants, not New York.
Giants.
It was the Giants that he went to camp. Just went through to some groups, nothing impactful. But yeah, dude, I agree with you guys both on what you're saying with Garantano. I know just watching him play initially, once he got hurt, there wasn't much left in the tank for him, which you can't blame him. That was a back injury or a rib injury. I can't remember, but those are pretty serious when you do receive those. Messes with your breathing. Standing up sucks. So Mark Nelson said, new broom sweeps clean. Will the Roughnecks be improved? We will see.
It would be difficult not to be improved.
That's very true. It's very true. I mean, you can't
setting the bar high.
You can only do one game worse than one.
Yeah, so. Not much lower you can go.
XFL Mike G said, made these moves prior to the public event introducing the new GM. Very true. Mm-hmm. I think the event's on the 27th.
Yeah, I mean, again, this move was a clear statement that for Will Lewis that I'm coming in here and I'm going to build a good team for Houston. So it is a good talking point to have at this public event. Be like, hey, we know that you fans were not happy about how we played. So here's the moves that we're making to do it. We're not just speaking words. We're taking action, and we're going to make sure that we give you the team that you guys deserve. We want to go back to that 2020, 2023 Houston Roughnecks team that you guys are used to.
Oh, that'd be nice. Get PJ Walker. That'll do it for me. I'll buy multiple season tickets. You do that.
Everyone wants June Jones back, so you got him and PJ Walker together again. I mean, that's a dream that will never happen.
True, yeah.
PJ Walker will never come back to spring football. Maybe June Jones if you maybe convince him to do it, but
PJ Walker's worth is not worth getting hurt in a UFL season at this point. I mean, I don't know how much money he's worth, but I'm sure he's made a lot of cash over the past few years just playing in the NFL. And that's what goes back into what we're talking about with UFL to NFL players. 1 year on an NFL team, even as a practice player, can change their lives completely. And it completely change them. So
yeah, he would need that Brent Huntley money for him to come back.
Yes, sir. Mark Nelson said, do you think Mark Thompson will land somewhere else? I believe so, as long as he's not injured.
I don't think so. I think he tends to talk a little too much on social media, and I think that
he's very outspoken. That's the nice way of saying it.
Yes. So I think that may rub some people the wrong way, and he just didn't perform well last year. I mean, simple fact. So he may have to work his way back up into the good graces of the UFL, but I actually don't see him landing anywhere in the UFL.
Yeah, and then they had the mess with the selling of merchandise, and people didn't receive all that bad publicity from that stuff. I don't really want to speak on it because I don't know the truth of what really happened. But man, you could always bet. You get on Twitter X, and you can see that the interactions, and so I get what you're saying 100%. But who knows, man? He could show up, show out. Running the mouth.
I mean, he could play. Yeah, he could play for sure. He's when he's on, he's one of the best running backs in the league. But just couldn't stay healthy last year, and I mean, he got beat out by TJ Pleasure, and nothing against TJ, but he's not a starting running back in the UFL. I'm sorry.
Well,
so
one of the things we've seen in the UFL and in these spring leagues is, if you are a pounder, a guy who excels between the tackles, spring football may not be your forte because the offensive lines are simply not consistent enough, not good enough to open holes on a consistent basis. The running backs that we've seen have a lot of success more often than not are the ones that can get to the outside, the ones that can make plays on their own, the ones that can, do well in space. Because offensive line blocking isn't that great. And I kind of got the impression that Mark Thompson was kind of a north-south guy who worked best between the tackles. And, you get behind a bad offensive line, and Houston had a bad offensive line, that's going to affect your performance. And I think that's part of what happened with Mark Thompson. And so, now that we've got a season in the books and general managers and head coaches can take a look at what worked and what didn't from a player standpoint, they can say, hey, maybe instead of scheming this way, let's look for players who can do this better and see if we can succeed that way. So, that could be a consideration as well.
That's a great point.
Okay, moving on. DeMarcus, I've seen your question, and we'll get to it. So we'll talk about the NFL cuts or draft here in just a second. Let's jump into the college draft talk, guys. Both of you had a special with the Marcast. Did you do it the day of the draft?
We did.
So people at home, if you're listening, go check that out. I'm sure there's a lot more information on each player and teams and such. We're going to just do an overview over it and just discuss it. But I don't want to be redundant with what they've already done. Makes for dry content. So first up, this is the question I'm getting from a lot of people. Why are they doing this? What's the point in the draft? And what do the rights mean that you get from this draft? So what I did, Mark Nelson or UFLBoard, I believe it was him that wrote it, put out an article with everything in it, and I'll put the link in the chat for everybody too. Sorry, guys.
Well, to answer your question,
go ahead.
While you're doing that, who doesn't love a draft? Come on. First of all, that's my opinion on it. But it's the time of the year where, the UFL has been off TV for a month. They want to stay in the consciousness of the fans. They want to make some moves. And so this is one way to do it. It's one way to get back on certain fans' radars. And so there's that point of view. There's also, look, if you are a professional sports league, you probably have a draft of some kind. So it's just that's part of it as well, I think. And I think they're still in that mindset where they want to be as fair as possible. They want as much equality amongst these teams as they can get. Maybe that's not the right word. Parity is the right word. And so a draft is a way to do that. It is a way to have the have-nots of the league, the Memphises and the Houstons, get first pick and get preferential choice of these players over the better teams in the league who choose 7th and 8th, right? So it's a way to restock these rosters in the offseason and to encourage parity amongst the teams. And if not for a draft, it's kind of a free-for-all with free agents, which you could do if you wanted to. We're seeing that right now. We're seeing some of the players Houston agreed to terms with were players who were eligible for this 2024 college draft and who were not chosen. So, all this means is they're drafting these players' rights. That's really what the NFL draft is too. It's a rights draft. The players have to sign a contract first before, they can play. And it's the same thing here. For example, Memphis drafted Jason Bean, number 1 overall. He's right now in the NFL with the Indianapolis Colts. So were he to get released and choose to play in the UFL, Memphis would have his rights exclusively until they released him, traded him, whatever. So if he wanted to play in the UFL, he would go to Memphis. He would sign a contract with the league and be assigned to the Memphis team. So that's all it really means when they're talking about drafting the rights of these players, because none of these players are under contract yet. Some of them have agreed to terms, signed letters of intent already. A couple Houston players have. But that's really what you're doing. You're drafting their rights. If they decide to play in the UFL, they would go to the team that drafted them.
Yes, that's it. That's the shebang of the rights. There's nothing else you can really add to that. The only things I thought were interesting, I didn't know this till I looked at the article. Players must have been eligible to be selected in the 2024 NFL draft and were not selected. UFL teams will hold exclusive rights to the players they select in the draft until the player reports to the team or the team gives up that player's rights. All players eligible for the 2024 UFL College Draft must have been out of high school for at least 3 years and exhausted or waived their college eligibility with some limited exceptions. And lastly, all players who sign a UFL contract, including players who remain under contract from the 2024 season, will have an NFL out during the NFL season. So everything you said, just nice and pretty right there. I didn't know the part about they weren't eligible unless they've been out of high school for 3 years and exhausted their college eligibility. I didn't know that part was in there until I read this article.
I mean, technically, it's kind of like the NFL. I mean, when
I
you
think
go
it's
into the NFL draft,
the same thing.
You can go into the draft at 3 years out of college because there's some redshirt sophomores who end up going into the NFL draft if they're good enough. So.
It's different from the NBA where you can play 1 year in college and jump right in, if they still do that, I'm not sure if that's still a thing with the NBA draft, but I know for a while it was.
Last year with the XFL draft, I mean, was the same stipulation involved? I mean, I didn't remember that. That's why I was like, what? Okay, that makes sense. Totally. I thought it was just something you kind of understood. But seeing it down here actually makes sense to me. And to everyone else who's asking, what does the rights mean? Why are they doing this? What's the point if they can go play in the NFL? I mean, this is it, guys. They're basically just putting a reserve on them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the XFL draft was the same last year, and I know the USFL draft was a little bit different, but they did that before the NFL draft, so there were some players who were drafted in both the USFL and the NFL draft as well, since they ran it in, I think, February before the NFL draft.
We need a rule book for this stuff. I want to see like an official 2024 college draft rule book. But yeah. Guys, in terms of the rookie draft, and I guess I'll go with Anthony first. I mean, Anthony, I saw your article on some of the players highlighting some. Any notable names that you're really watching and looking forward to joining the UFL?
I mean, my article's been focused more on the Renegades, so I'll just say like John Reese Plumlee, I think is a really fascinating prospect. I was actually quite surprised the Renegades went quarterback first, but I don't know if that's a telling sign of what's going to happen with Luis Perez if he ends up coming back or not, or if Plumlee is just an insurance for for the Renegades just in case Perez doesn't come back. But Plumlee's got great ability. I mean, he's a great athlete. I think he can come in and he can be like Lindsey Scott and do some of the same packages that Lindsey Scott was doing for the Renegades, but maybe instead. But I still think Lindsey Scott maybe it's a more polished passer than Plumlee is. I think Plumlee needs a little more time. He had a tendency of kind of turning the ball over a little bit more. He got better as through the last couple of years at UCF, but I still think there's some development there needed with him. But when Plumlee gets in the open field, that dude is super quick. I mean, he's fast. Like he can outrun anybody on defense. So I think just the potential with him can be really good. So I'm excited about him. And then obviously Drake Stoops is obviously an exciting pick. I don't know if he's actually ever going to play in the UFL because I think he's pretty solid and has, I think, a legitimate shot of making the Los Angeles Rams' final roster. But I mean, if he doesn't make it and he ends up going to the UFL and join his dad, Bob Stoops on the Renegades, that could be a really fascinating thing. And I actually think he would fit really well with that offense. I mean, they already got Javonte Payton, they got Tyler Vaughn, so they got good receivers. And Drake Stoops can come in there and be the perfect slot receiver for them. So he can really actually kind of balance out that receiving core well, especially now with Sal Cannella with Tampa Bay. If he ends up making Tampa Bay, then they just pretty much lost their best pass catcher. So Stoops could actually come in there and be a great replacement for him. But I mean, other than that, I'm glad they did work on the offensive line. I wish they would have done a little more in the secondary. I think that could have used some more attention for the Renegades, but I think the offensive line depth is really important because that was kind of an up and down position last year for them where they really started slow on the offensive line. They kind of built up and did better as the year went on, but and then I know like offensive line is always like the number one position spring football leagues are looking for because it's so hard to find a good offensive lineman that's not in the NFL because they're just so hard to develop. So I'm glad they got some depth there, and I think overall the Renegades had a really solid one. So obviously that's always my focus is always first comes to the Renegades and what they do.
Oh, understood. I just found a couple of your articles, so I wanted to ask. Greg, in terms of your hot picks, I mean, is there anybody you want to note as well? I know I've got your articles pulled up too. You did one based on the XFL conference, and then you did one based on the USFL conference.
Yeah, just a couple things to point out here. We were talking about the Houston Roughnecks remaking their roster. Yabi Oki, which is a first-round pick out of Houston, out of Charlotte for Houston, he's already agreed to terms with the league, and he is, if he can keep his head on straight and perform to his abilities, he has real potential as a pass rusher in Houston. So I think he's going to make that defense better. So he's one that I would look for. I thought, DC last year in the rookie draft, they were the most successful team in the rookie draft. They got Ty Scott, who was a key contributor now with the Seattle Seahawks. They got Momo Sanogo, a linebacker, who ended up as a starter by the end of the year. So they were the best XFL team in terms of drafting key contributors in the rookie draft. And I thought they had the best draft here in the UFL draft. I think the one thing that I would caution people is, again, same thing with Houston signings. These players that were chosen in the college draft are at best depth players probably in the UFL because, you know, a lot of them are not going to play in the UFL. So the ones who do are not on NFL radars. But DC, if they could get even 3 or 4 of their selections to play for them in the UFL next year, I think that's a victory because their draft was so good. Guys like Leonard Taylor, Garrett Greenfield, offensive tackle, Curtis Jacobs out of Penn State. I think these can be frontline players for DC if they make that transition. But the difference with the XFL rookie draft last year and the UFL college draft this year is the rookie draft last year only drafted players who were not under NFL contract. So there were a lot of players who, before the merger, signed letters of intent because their NFL prospects were dimmer than the players who were drafted in the college draft. A lot of these players entered the NFL. I think all of them entered the NFL as undrafted free agents this year. So many of them will stick on 53-man rosters. They'll go on injured reserve. They'll sign on to practice squads and sign futures contracts next January. So a lot of these players will never get the opportunity to play in the UFL. That's why I say if you're DC and you get 3 or 4 of those 10 players you chose to play for you, that's a victory in my mind.
You can definitely see that was the strategy of some of these teams. I feel like they didn't plan on keeping everyone that they're drafting, but I mean it's smart. It makes sense. Being an intelligent coach, I mean you're looking ahead of what's going on and trying to get that spot filled. I know looking at Houston's first pick, I was a little disappointed just in that it was a D end, which he is a beast, but at the same time, I mean, don't we need some offensive help in Houston? But yeah. Yeah, I thought your breakdowns were great on here, Greg. You have the information about the school. You've got a rating. You've got their name, their number. I mean, you've got everything on here almost. And so this is a really cool articles to check out. Guys at home, if you're listening, check them out. It's UFLBoard.com. I'll include it in the notes when I post them later this evening. All these articles, guys, I'll post with the notes. So easy to find. Martin Nelson said, players who never had their name called in the NFL draft can at least say their name was called in the UFL draft. On Twitter, yep, on Facebook. That's one aspect I don't like. I didn't like it last year either. It feels like it's downplayed a little bit. Hell, even a live YouTube would suffice to get some excitement up. Hopefully we can get that. So.
But at least this time around, at least for I know last year the XFL didn't do really anything about announcing picks. I will say the one thing that the USFL really did well was when they have these type of drafts, they're posting like images. They have these great little graphics on like, here's the first pick, the second pick, and they're announcing them every single time. So I at least like that, so we can all keep track of what's going on during the draft and who's being picked. So yeah, I mean, obviously we'd like it to be like a televised event or a streaming event, but that's going to cost too much money for the league to do, to be honest with you. And they're already trying to like be careful on how they're doing their budget. So at least this is the next good thing they can do, and at least post, pick by pick on what's going on. And at least they're keeping the public, I guess entertained or at least informed of what's going on. So you at least, I at least like that they did that. And they're at least putting in the effort to do that.
Yeah, the organization felt much better than last year. Last year, we were getting some of the rounds from people that weren't related to the UFL or XFL. Sorry.
Yeah, the league released the names in a press release afterward, which exciting, right? Who doesn't love reading press releases to get draft picks, right?
The same template over and over again.
I know. But yeah, like Anthony said, it would be expensive to produce, and it would not get the eyeballs that you would need to cover that. I mean, right now, we're all kind of in this bubble where, oh, sure, they should do all this. They should get attention this way. The honest truth is there's not enough people interested right now to make it worth it from the league's perspective. So again, if we're talking 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line and this thing really catches on and viewership goes up and people start talking about it more and more, and it's more in the consciousness of the football fan, then yeah, I could eventually see the league putting something out. They streamed the XFL Combine last year, which was kind of an interesting experiment. They could do something very similar with the UFL Draft next year, but it's at this point, there's just simply, the reality is there's not enough general interest outside of the diehards like us and the people who are listening or watching this to make it worth it from a financial perspective for the league.
Yeah. And I mean, let's be honest, if they put, if Fox and ESPN don't want to broadcast it, like, it may not be the best thing to broadcast it, because what if you say, like, oh, Memphis's first pick is Jason Bean, and then Jason's like, what the hell is the Memphis Showboat? What's the UFL? He probably doesn't know much about it either. So that happens a lot when you're reading these articles of, like, hey, how does it feel to be drafted by the UFL? What's the UFL? I was drafted. Like, no one told me about it. Like, we see that a lot too. And I mean, that's not the greatest publicity, but it's still good publicity for the UFL, where I saw, like, last week, there was a lot of traffic on, like, Jason Beam was the #1 overall pick to the UFL. Like, that's still, like, even the players don't know, like, what the league is, or didn't know that they were getting drafted. It's still getting impressions online, and you're getting articles, you're getting sites like, these pro football sites that are writing about it, because they're still of interest in it. And even in a slow time like the summer where there's not much going on in football, this is still a great thing to talk about, and it will get people excited. Like, it's had a couple weeks of at least content for all of us to work on. So it's still a good thing, even though, like, it may not feel as special, like a lot of these guys may end up not playing in the league. It still gives a lot of conversation on what's going on.
That's my main interest, is giving me something to write about. So that's number one for me when it comes to this. No, but I mean, Anthony is right. You look at the social media accounts for a lot of these college teams that these players played for, and they're posting that, congratulations so-and-so for getting drafted by the DC Defenders. I mean, that's worth something. I mean, who knows how much it's worth, but it's getting word out to a subset of fans who otherwise may not know about the UFL, who's in it, what kind of players are in it. You're seeing sites that cover these college teams writing about players getting drafted in the UFL. So it's worth something to do it the way they did it, even if it isn't the pomp and circumstance that we all would love to see from the league at this point.
I totally agree with what you guys are saying, but I disagree in the fact that I feel like something could be put together that doesn't have to be in a production studio, that will highlight what we're talking about right now. I mean, guys like Scooby and who was the other guy he had with him last year? I can't remember his name. They had the YouTube show. It came on Sunday evenings. Something like that can be easily produced. I mean, we don't. This right here doesn't cost me money, and I produce it. So I feel like, these people could be the head guys, the people that people look up to for this information. And I think that's kind of what I would like to see. I wouldn't really want to see a big production either, like ESPN or nothing, but this.
So you're saying the UFL should contract us to do this?
Hey, I wish. We know we do this for love and for like $5 an article. That's what we do it for. So that's all it is. I mean, when it comes to the money stuff,
since my boss is listening, I am very happy with my pay and with my place at UFLBoard.com.
Hey, I'm just saying, guys, it's a labor of love, but I would like to see someone from there do it as well. And oh man, if they interacted with any of us, we would interact as well. If we could do anything together, I know you guys would, and many of the others would as well. So I mean, That's all I'm saying. I don't expect a big rah NFL draft style thing, but just a show to talk about this stuff and break some things down. Show that you are not too good to interact and mingle with your fans, because we are the fans, and that's kind of what we deserve doing this. We don't get anything else out of it. Just want to know that they're doing their due diligence. Some of this stuff, I hate the leaks. I hate stuff that gets leaked out early. I would like to hear this stuff from a more official source. As I was saying, I mean, I understand, but I just want to put my 2 cents in there. But UFL, holler at your boy. You don't even have to put my name on it.
Yeah, I mean, the XFL actually last year, I remember they did a live stream for one of the showcases, right? When they did on YouTube, I remember that.
It was the combine.
I mean,
it was at Arlington.
Yeah, the combine. Yeah,
it was awesome.
I mean, I'm sure it cost them some money because they had ESPN personalities on there. Yep. So I'm sure that probably cost some money. But that was when the XFL was just very big on like production and make sure they did the Player 54 documentary. So that was just a big thing for them. Hopefully, eventually they'll get back to that.
That was enjoyable though. I enjoyed that. Looking back at it, it was a good time to get everybody riled up right before we did the merger.
Yes.
Yeah, so we sat there and watched the combine for 2 days, and all of it meant nothing in the end.
Oh, all right. Let's move it on. Mike G, I seen you asked a question. I'll ask him at the end of the show. So just letting you know, since we're moved on from the convo. In terms of the college draft, did you guys have any more points or anything you wanted to hit on?
No, I just hope we can see more of these players actually get into the UFL. I'd love to see like Jason Bean in here and Cody Schrader just absolutely kill it in the UFL. So hopefully we can see more of these guys that come in and actually play. I think it would be massive for the league to have some of these college stars actually come in and light it up.
Yep, I agree with you. Even if it is just that stepping stone transition, it still would be great to see. So, question for you guys, and I know I asked you this beforehand, but publicly I'm going to ask you again. Have we heard any UFL Draft 2025 details? Any dates? Any rumors? Anything to hang our hats on?
I mean, I don't think there's been anything on it. My assumption is it's going to be, I think I said like October through January is probably when it's going to happen. But then again, it's like, how many drafts are we going to have? Because they, last year they have like supplemental drafts and they had like an actual, XFL draft. So, how many drafts are we actually going to have? I mean, I think that's more the question. Are we going to have multiple drafts? Are we going to have one that happens in October, and then when NFL cuts happen in January, are we going to have a second draft that's going to just be filled with those guys who were released? So, I mean, there could be multiple drafts that we could be talking about. I don't even know if there's going to be an official UFL draft. There could be 1, 2, there could be 3. Who knows?
Just wanted to ask you guys. I mean, I looked at online as hard as I could and could not find anything on it. So that's why I said I wanted to ask you publicly.
So I was looking at the showcase announcements, and when they first came out, there was a line in the announcements that said players are being scouted for potential eligibility in the UFL draft. Okay. And then a couple of showcase announcements came out and that line was taken out. So I was like, okay, maybe they're not doing a draft. And then the more recent ones have that line back in there. So I'm not even sure the league knows right now if they're going to hold another draft or 1 or 2 or 7 or whatever the case may be. My thing is, okay, this draft that we just went through is a college draft. Okay, the parameters for it are very clear. If you have a draft in November, are you just drafting guys who are cut at the end of training camp? Are you drafting other players? And if so, are you kind of cutting off signings at some point? Because you expect that teams are going to continue signing players or agreeing to terms with players just as they've done over the last week or so. So what makes someone eligible to be signed versus eligible to be in the draft? So that's what I don't like. I'd like a clearer understanding of, if you're holding a draft, hold it for a reason. Like, have specific parameters for who is in it, who is eligible for it, and who is not. That's kind of what I didn't like about, and I know I've had people disagree with me about this, is you've got a college draft right now where the only people eligible are players who were eligible for the 2024 NFL Draft. Yet, during the UFL season, you had teams signing players who went undrafted in the 2024 NFL Draft. So I just felt like if you were going to have a draft where those players were eligible, you shouldn't be able to sign them before the draft, because I think that kind of defeats the purpose of the draft a little bit. But I totally admit that I'm persnickety about that sort of thing. So maybe I'm just out on my own here. But as speaking as someone who loves drafts, I would be totally okay if they don't have another one unless they have a really clear and good idea of why they're having it.
I mean, I'd like to know, like, if they're going to do drafts, like, who's in the draft pool? I think that's more the question, like, I want to hear. Like, I mean, I look, let's be honest. They did this draft because if they can get somebody like Jason Bean, like a big name quarterback that can, get some attention to the league, that's what it's more about. I mean, I don't even know if Memphis really thinks they're going to get Jason Bean that's actually going to play in the league, but just having those big college names alone, I mean, it's, I think, more publicity than anything. But I mean, if they are going to have another draft, like, I want to know who's in it. Like, who are they going to be selecting from? Like, that's something they don't really share. Like, they don't, like, Greg's done a great job of finding out who's at these showcases. Like, I'd love to know who's working out, like, who's actually, like, who's going to find themselves being eligible to be in a so-called UFL draft. We just don't know what the player pool looks like. Yeah. If you can get some big name players that have played in the NFL and throw them into the 2025 UFL draft, let us know about it. Like, let us know who's in the pool. Like the UFL site should be putting up, like, a draft board of, like, the top 100 players that are available for the UFL draft. Like, that's the type of publicity they need. And if they get some big names there, I want to know them. Otherwise, we're all just kind of left out in the cold, just trying to figure out, like, okay, who's actually going to play in this league? Like, you don't want to get players that are drafted and, like, well, no, I'm never going to play in the UFL. Why would I play in the UFL? You want guys who are actually, like, if you can get guys to commit to the UFL, just sign a UFL contract in general, and then throw them into the pool to be drafted. Like, let's see who those players are so that we can, start getting used to the idea of them being in the league and get them drafted to teams.
That was kind of like the XFL draft in 2019 for the 2020 season, where you had to have players opt into the draft pool, right? And so they were names that were already amenable to playing in the XFL. And so when a team drafted you, as a fan, you knew that player was going to go to camp. You're drafting players in this college draft, whatever future draft you have, you're drafting players, you're just drafting names. You're drafting guys who may not ever want to show up, So I think that's kind of the difficulty of it. That's why I, like the idea of the draft pool as well, not only for the reasons, Anthony, you mentioned, but also because if I'm drafting this guy, I know, and as a GM, I want to know, how do I do a college draft if I don't know who's going to show up to training camp in February or March? How do I build a draft board that way? How do I fill needs that way? So that would help me as an evaluator, certainly on a team, figure out who I'm drafting and that sort of thing too.
I'm going to ask you guys, last year, I feel like we had this discussion, but it pertained to letters of intent. And if I remember correctly, to be entered into the draft last year, they had to sign an LOI. Do you guys remember that correctly? They didn't?
No.
So what was the letter of intent exactly? It's just like saying you have rights to the player, correct?
Well, I think that's what we're seeing now when the XFL Comms is putting out these list of players. They're saying that these players agreed to terms. And that's why earlier in the show, I made the distinction between signing and agreeing to terms, because my understanding of it is by agreeing to terms, you're signing a letter of intent. You don't sign a contract until you get to training camp. Gotcha. So players were drafted in that XFL rookie draft, and then you would see throughout the next few months their names show up on the list of so-and-so agreed to terms. Well, that's because they were drafted and then they signed their letter of intent to go to training camp. And of course that all blew up because half the teams were eliminated and you had the dispersal drafts and everything like that. So my understanding is that nobody is signing contracts right now. They're signing letters of intent. And then once they show up to camp, they'll sign that contract. And Anthony, if you got any more clarification on that, just, feel free to correct me.
No, I think that's spot on. And I think a big reason why they may not do like contracts necessarily is because everyone's got the same contract. So, you're just agreeing to like, hey, if I can, I'll come to the league and sign the contract there, but everyone's got the same contract. So it's like, you're not really agreeing to anything different.
The LOI kind of, in a way, I think it reserves your spot in training camp on that team. At least that's my impression of it.
Gotcha. That was what the last year. I remember when they went through the draft, there was a big hoopla about who's going to be in the draft, and there were certain qualifications as well. And I can't remember without looking, but we had this talk. It was similar. What I have pulled up on the screen now is just the register for the showcase events. And like you said, there, the last sentence, players will be evaluated based on performance for the inclusion in the UFL Draft player pool for the upcoming 2025 season. So that's about all we got right now.
Very vague and very mysterious from the league.
Yes.
They probably did it on purpose so they can do whatever.
No,
make it a little easier.
Best.
Yep.
That's what they did best.
But at least we know it's coming in 2025 for the season. Oh, man. Let me go to some comments, guys. XFL Mike G said, I've heard that the draft will have players that teams protect and the rest of the team is draft eligible, like last season's super draft, but I've only heard it as a rumor. What do you guys know? So he basically told you what they know and what I know, which is not much. But yeah, that's an interesting rumor.
That sounds like a terrible idea.
Good way to piss some people off.
It sounds like what you would be doing for an expansion draft. When leagues have expansion drafts, existing teams are allowed to protect up to a certain amount of players, and then kind of like what the dispersal draft was last year. And then anyone that is on your roster that you did not protect is eligible to be drafted by another team. I guess in a way that could be a replacement for free agency, since everybody signs the same contracts, and the UFL doesn't have that free agency period that other sports have. So maybe this would be a replacement for that. But you're just shuffling around players at that point. If you're having a draft, I want new players coming in through that avenue.
I think you're overcomplicating it. We don't need to overcomplicate the offseason. If players want to be released, just do as normal business, and you can still do like the USFL still had the free agency period that I think started in August last year. So you can have a free agency period. Like you can still do like the regular football offseason stuff. But let's not get ahead of ourselves and too crazy. That may overcomplicate stuff for the offseason. Let's keep it simple. We're trying to get to year 2 of the UFL. Let's just get there first.
Agreed.
I can't help but laugh because last year the conversations were similar. About a month from now, 2 months from now, we started having the same type of combos. David Comer said, "So true. It's hard to care when no idea of availability."
Yeah, it's a great publicity opportunity for the league to be like, hey, look at all these players that have worked out in our showcases. Here's like you can do personal stories. Like here's a story about these players. Like that was the great thing about Player 54 is you got to see like Dwayne and Danny go out to these workouts and you got to learn about some of these players that were working out. Like there were guys that were like, yeah, I left college so that I can try to make the XFL. Like those are great stories to have. And I think the league, since this merger, and I know there's a lot of craziness when it comes out of the merger, but they've really missed a storytelling part that I think made the XFL so great last year and what made the USFL so great in 2022, because the USFL had their own documentary and it was great hearing those stories. We got the great Devion Smith story where he got cut for eating pizza instead of, chicken sandwich or whatever the hell it was. But that was a great, like, it's not the best publicity, but it's a story that people are going to remember. And I think that's what they need to do a better job of being storytellers to these players. Because again, it's all about, the mantra was Player 54. Let's tell the story of these players. Like, let's hear who's going to be in the draft pool. Like that, I think it's a great way to get content out there.
Yes, sir. And that was a great documentary. The whole thing, that from start to beginning, start to end, I really enjoyed that. Looking back now, we didn't really have that last year, so it definitely was needed.
Yeah.
XFL Mike G said he just needed to combat that rumor. That's some Facebook rumors, Mike G. You can't be talking to them Facebook people. They'll get you.
There's always some kind of different news going on in Facebook. Can't really trust everything you read there. So.
Hell, on Twitter and X as well. It's the same way. You got to be careful. You guys are trusted sources, but sometimes I'm like, hey, you're jumping the gun. Not pertaining to you, but others.
I go to Mike or James. They're usually reliable. They're the true insiders. So I prefer to go to them.
Agreed. All right, guys, let's wrap this up. We got one more subject, and that's the showcase events. There's already been 2. And Greg, you've wrote some great, what'd you call them, capsule articles pertaining to some of the players there. I'm going to get it pulled up. The next showcase event will be tomorrow? Yeah, it's tomorrow in Houston. That'll be
Sunday, I think.
Atlanta's tomorrow. Houston is Sunday.
Gotcha. Let me change this. Hold on.
But yeah, I scoured the bowels of social media to find as many players as I could who attended the DC showcase and the St. Louis showcase that happened a couple weeks ago, and posted as many players that I could find that attended those as possible, and just gave a little bit of background, a little bit of information that I could look up online about them, about their stats, about their stories. And as you mentioned, there are guys out there who attend these showcases who have really interesting stories that should be told, even if they don't make the team. Or even if they don't sign a contract with the UFL. So there's still stories worth telling, and right now they're going untold. So the one nice thing about these write-ups is I'm learning about lots of colleges that I've never ever heard of, that I never knew existed. So that's these obscure colleges that some of these guys are from. I'm dumbfounded every time I write this column hearing about some of these colleges. But yeah, it's been a learning experience. And again, a lot of these players probably will not play in the UFL, but I figure if no one in the UFL is telling their story, someone should. So if I can write a couple lines about them, hey, I'm more than happy to do so.
But yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like Greg, like this is the stuff that the league needs to be doing, and like this is your articles have been fascinating to read, because it is reading about guys that really should be, like, these guys should be players in the UFL. Like, the UFL should be going after these smaller school guys who get overlooked, and they may be really talented, but they may not be, like the Division I guys that get all the attention. Like, these are guys that can be impactful and can play in the league and can be a star in the UFL. Because they're more than likely never going to make the NFL, but if they can go out to the showcase, show their skills, and maybe these are kind of the sleeper picks that get into the UFL and become stars in the league for years to come.
Love to see it, man. And these guys need anything they can get. And Greg, can I ask you, compiling this stuff, I mean, were you contacting these guys directly? Is that the best route?
No, I am, as I said, going through social media, usually Twitter and Instagram, and a lot of people will post, hey, attending such and such a showcase, wish me luck. Or, they'll reply to a UFL post on Instagram, see you at the showcase. I'll be, something like that. And I'll, find out who they are, look them up online, look up their stats. And it's always a surprise because you never know who you're going to find. It is such a wide swath. You get Division I guys, you get Division III guys, you get guys who were top players on their teams. You get guys who were career backups who played a few snaps here and there. So it's just such a wide swath of players who come to these showcases from all over, all different backgrounds, all different experience levels. That's what's so fun in doing these articles, is finding information about all of these guys.
I'm impressed because last year I really tried to interview some of these guys along the way, and it was a difficult path trying to get contact with them. So
I will say my secret sauce, I kind of give it away in this article, because every one of these names is hyperlinked. And if you click the hyperlink, it takes you to the post where I got where I found out that they were. So I'm kind of citing my source there. In a way, it's taking you to the post where they talk about there were, okay, so that's a post about the UFL, and one of the replies was someone saying that they were going to be attending the showcase.
Wow. So you just chase this, man. That's awesome.
I do. It's a lot of reading replies to social media posts, which is very dangerous. It's not something I would recommend in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. You're wading into dangerous waters by doing that sometimes. But hey, I'm a journalist. You got to do what you got to do to get the story.
Just you got to fight the porn bots. Don't click the links. Don't click the profile. Just ignore and move on. Once the post gets really dirty, it tends to just get worse and worse and worse from what I see. But man, yeah, that's awesome that you're doing this. I don't see anyone else doing it like you are. There's many people who are doing posts, highlighting this or talking about this player or these players, but you're actually getting to the nitty gritty and giving something for people to hold on to and respect and telling about schools and everything.
And I shout out in my first column, James Larson posted a lot of players who were coming to these showcases. I know Avion Plummer did the same thing. Shady Sports did the same thing. So I kind of gave them an extra shout out at the beginning of my article for the St. Louis showcase, because that kind of started me in that direction. Is they were posting a lot. They had talked to a lot of the players. I mean, not a lot, but a lot of the players on my list who were attending the showcases. So I got several of the players from them. So I gave them an extra shout out at the beginning.
Appreciate everyone on the ground doing the Lord's work, as we call it, and making a name for these guys. It's greatly appreciated. It's not like they get paid to do it, so it's definitely for the love.
Yeah, absolutely.
I dropped a link to the DC article in the comments, but like I said, guys at home, if you're wanting to check these out, I'll have them in the notes as well. But if you do go to UFLBoard.com, you'll see them all there. You can click Greg's name once you find an article by him, and it'll just take you to everything he's done. Well, I was going to ask about some of the capsule players, but we've been on for an hour and 20. Unless you have something you want to add, Greg, I guess we can go ahead and get ready to wrap it up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot of insight on those players other than just kind of the information that I presented, because a lot of them were from obscure colleges and Division II and III schools and places like that. So there are some that are from, maybe even be recognizable names from recognizable colleges, Division I colleges. That's why I say it's just such a wide cross section of college football players who are attending these showcases, and that's part of what is really interesting about them.
Yes, sir. Anthony, do you got anything to add on this subject?
I mean, just major kudos to you, Greg. I wish I had the time to put in the effort to do that, but I mean, you're honestly doing what the league should be doing. Like, the league should be doing this. Like, it shouldn't be us having to do it, but I think it's great content, and I think it's something different. Like, I think this is the content that fans need to see, because we're so stuck on signings and stuff like that. But let's hear about these player stories.
I could write another article on expansion, Anthony. If that's something you're interested in reading, but we don't say the E word, Greg. We don't say the E word. Come on. I don't know that I can bring myself to do that.
Stream over. Bye, guys. No, I agree with you, and it's not. We're not just seeing the regurgitated crap like we do in some different outlet places. So I'll say it's great that you do what you're doing as well. And this is how people like the spring leagues. Me personally, coming into it from the get-go, but years ago, we're talking about AAF days, it was the players that were from the University of Memphis. And that's why I started watching AAF and the Memphis Express and all. I mean, this is kind of what got me going. So I think you're going to give people something to latch on to and find a new fan or find a new player to be a fan of.
Yep, exactly.
Chris Mason, he's going crazy over here. Expansion.
Stop it. See, Greg, look what you said, man.
Just keep it in the chat. Keep it in the chat. I don't want to see it.
Expansion. Oh, Chris. Well, guys, it's been a great show. I appreciate your appearance as always. I don't know when I'll be jumping back on to do another show, because I don't want to just be redundant with this subject, UFL. So we'll see what happens. We'll be watching you guys both closely. Always do. I appreciate everything you do for the community, for the players, the sport in general. You guys are all, you both have different feelers and different things, and you do a really good job at doing what you do. So please keep doing it, and know that fans like me respect it a lot. We appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Anything that you guys want to say before we officially close it out?
No, I mean, just like you said, let's, when you look at sites like Pro Football Newsroom and UFLBoard and, Fan Nation Sports Illustrated, there's a lot of really good sites out there that are covering these leagues. So, even for you guys at Alternative Football Network, we need to, these are the leagues that, if you want to really get the right information about, alternative football, but like UFL and CFL stuff, like make sure you're supporting these sites. Cause I mean, a lot of us, this is part-time jobs for us, but I know a lot of guys are busting their butts to get the news out and get content out to cover these leagues. So make sure you go support everyone.
Agreed. And it's
here.
I will say it's tough. You really have to find where you fit in this whole community. You guys, I definitely feel like you are the writers. You are the people that I'm looking for articles to understand what's going on. I don't think my place is that. I feel like this is my place. It's just to have the conversations and discuss. So that's why I say I appreciate you so much, is because you really help bridge that gap for people like me that we don't necessarily want to write or do that research ourselves. So thank you. Seriously.
Yeah, you're a great facilitator of discussion, and that's not nothing.
Yep,
always.
For sure.
It's always a pleasure, man, and I appreciate you guys both, Greg, Anthony. We'll see you again very soon. Thank you again for the appearance, and take it easy, friends.
Will do. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, y'all. All right. So Mark Nelson said, good guest tonight. Learned a lot from Anthony and Greg. Always do. Always do. We learn a lot from Mr. Mark as well when he comes on. We appreciate Mark Nelson at UFL Board. Thank you, Mark. XFL Mike G, thank you guys. You always have the best information. I agree as well. I know that when there's info coming from either one of these men, that it's valuable and truthful as much as they can make it truthful, or they won't write about it. Like I said, guys, for me, I don't know when we'll do another UFL Insiders. We'll see what happens. I'm trying to line some guests up that have been at some of the showcases, but I don't really want to overdo it. Just taking the time and then getting productive episodes and stuff done. It's our articles on the website aren't really churning out as much, so I really want to make sure that I'm doing this to the best of my ability, and that means not doing filler episodes that have nothing to offer you guys to listen to or watch. So check out social media. You'll know when there's another episode at least 2 to 3 days beforehand. We'll definitely come back together and do more once we have some kind of updates with the UFL, but right now I think we've hit most of the excitement, with the exception to the player showcase events that are left. If there's anything you guys need, if you have a guest you want to recommend, shoot me a message. Always down for conversation. I appreciate you watching. Appreciate Greg and Anthony as well. I've got their stuff rolling at the bottom of the screen. It's been going throughout the show. So if you're not following them or don't know where to find them, check that out. They're easy to find, though, because if you're in the community, you know them well. And there's a lot of other great writers and people that do shows. So just figure out what your flavor is and go with it. I'm not necessarily going to say one's better than the other. It's just really what you like and what you want to do, and it like anything else. So if you did watch the show tonight, I appreciate it. Thank you greatly for sitting through an hour and 26 minutes of our show. Thank you for coming back. If you're a returning guest, if you're brand new, check out some of the older shows, see what you think, leave a comment, like, share, whatever. It's always a pleasure. I am Matthew Tyler. I want to say thank you to UFL Board, as always. Mark Nelson, UFL Board, great crew, great site. I can't say anything bad about them at all. So check it out. You can also check out alternativefootballnetwork.com. We got a bunch of podcasts on there related to different alternative football, as well as some news articles pertaining to different alternative football. So check it out. Now, like I said, it's not as active now that the season with the UFL is over, but we hope to pick it back up here this next season. Like I said, guys, I'm Matthew Tyler. It's always a pleasure. Thank you again for watching, and I'm out.
Go hard, go home, go home, go hard, go hard, go home, go hard, go hard, go home, go hard. Touchdown like an end zone. When the circle turn to my home, can't get me out of my zone. Go hard, or go home. Go hard, or go home.